This podcast is not safe for work and will feature movie spoilers. It will feature scenes described of a graphic nature. It will contain language which most listeners may find offensive. Welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. This is episode 475. I'm your host Duncan McLeish. Welcome to the show. Up on this episode we are into the top 3 of my top 10 favourite horror movies, accurate without a fault, up until the 31st of August 2023, and at that point, time isn't on my side. No, it isn't. So yeah, you have managed to suffer through already a myriad of different reviews covering movies, old and new alike, but you've landed now on the coveted 3 spot. Now I said before that my list is sometimes fluid, and to be honest with you, the top 3 have in the past changed a bit over time. They've morphed, depending on when I watched the movie last, what sort of mood I'm in, because they're 3 completely different sorts of movies. They do have a common thread through them to an extent, but of those 3 movies, ladies and gentlemen, this one is the oldest. In fact, I'll go one step further, ladies and gents. This is the oldest movie on my top 10 list. To me, it's the one that's the game changer. Like, all bets are off when we reach this movie. Horror cinema, even up until this movie, was still transitioning from kind of, you know, monster movies, B-movie sci-fi, the kind of universal classic monster idea of horror. And it was slowly transitioning through. We'd had like a flurry in the 60s with serial killers and, you know, man is the real enemy. But we hadn't really tackled it on the dark level that we did as soon as we hit the 70s, and that kind of kicked off in 72. It did happen slightly before people go absolutely crazy. It did happen a little bit before that, but 72 is, to me, a real watermark level where you get Last House on the Left, and then it does feel like cinema is dangerous, and then 2 years later you get a movie which to me changes the landscape completely. If you look at almost every other country in the world's horror output in the first 4 years of the 70s, and maybe even the couple of years after, so like maybe up to 76, everyone is struggling with what it is that they want to make to terrify their audiences. And for whatever reason, America, and I'm not saying we're looking at Vietnam, for whatever reason, America just really tapped into a vein that still to this day is scary. Some of these movies are genuinely scary and they hold up. So with that in mind, it gives me great pleasure. It gives me a huge amount of joy to say that number 3 on my list is the Texas Chain Saw Massacre from 1974.
What happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
Stop!
This is the movie that is just as real, just as close,
Crazy! You gotta make us stop!
just as terrifying as being there. Even if one of them survives, what will be left? The Texas Chain Saw Massacre. After you stop screaming, you'll start talking about it.
And welcome back. So, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, 1974. Joining me on this review as always, my trusty iPad, where I can pick off the factoids from the IMDb before discarding it, throwing caution to the wind, and delivering an off-the-cuff review, hopefully in one take. We are still touching wood here, as much wood as I can touch, that we've managed to knock all these out in a single take. For the life of me, I don't know how that's happened. So let's give you some deets on this one. Texas Chain Saw Massacre is directed by, of course, the late great Tobe Hooper, and based on the screenplay by Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel. The movie itself stars Marilyn Burns, Edwin Neal, Alan Danziger, Paul A. Partain, William Vale, Terry McMinn, Jim Sydow, Gunnar Hansen, John Dugan, Robert Corton, William Creamer, John Henry Falk, Jerry Green, Ed Guin, and we're into drunk characters at that point in extras. Synopsis for this one is listed on the IMDb as 5 friends head out to rural Texas to visit the grave of a grandmother. On the way there, they stumble across what appears to be a deserted house, only to discover something sinister within. Something armed with a chainsaw. Oh man, ladies and gents, this review comes with coffee in a pumpkin mug, because every day's Halloween, obviously. So, Texas Chain Saw Massacre, late to the party on this one. This movie, for all intents and purposes, was heavily edited. It was originally banned and heavily edited in the UK, and on top of that as well, it existed in a weird period where it was essentially censored before the video nasties were created. So for those that don't know, and I mean what we're doing here, I have a whole other podcast called Doing the Nasty, which basically examines the movie from the list. But in the 80s, the UK went through this, what can only be described as puritanical right-wing censorship on media, specifically movies, where a bunch of titles, 72 in the original top 1 and 2 lists, were rounded up and essentially banned for viewing in the UK due to what was perceived as the ill effects it may have on the general populace's mind, i.e. will make you want to kill someone with a power tool. So Chainsaw Massacre exists out with that. It's commonly and mistakenly lumped into the video nasties, although it sits off to the side, so to speak. So it had a reputation, had a very strong reputation by the time I was starting to find my footings as a young teenager in horror. I was already checking out movies on the nasty list by virtue of terrible babysitting and a brother who was able to get things that were ripped on VHS. So I'd already seen a few titles. The Last House on the Left that we mentioned earlier on, I saw that when I was 14 years old. I Spit in Your Grave, I think I was between 12 and 13. Things like Zombie Flesh Eaters, stuff like that I'd seen early on. My brain couldn't fathom half of what it was taking in, so as a result of that, my ideas of how scary the movies were was slightly skewed. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre was one of those ones that I knew of by reputation. Actually, I knew from a pop culture standpoint, I knew who Leatherface was, but I'd never seen the original. Truth be told, I'd actually seen part 2 before I'd seen part 1, which I think might be the case for quite a lot of people in the UK. Part 2 was a big garish 80s horror comedy, and a lot of money spent on it, a lot of drugs spent on it as well, and I think everyone had seen that. I think everyone who was of an interest of horror had seen that. And out with the kind of ripped copies or imported copies of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you probably in the UK weren't fully acclimated to it if you grew up in the 80s. Let's put it that way. So, cut to me being 18 years old and this is a long way to get a movie review, but trust me, it's pivotal to why it's 3 on my list. Cut to me being 18 years old, and I have my first proper job, as well as, you know, being at college, studying audio technology and sound engineering. I had the opportunity to work in a video store, which was my first serious job, even though it was part-time. And we've mentioned it before, we mentioned it in the Tenebrae episode. It's where my interest in just consuming huge amounts of horror existed. Now, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequels were available in the video store, so by then I'd seen Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4, The Next Generation. So I'd seen those ones, and we were mere, a year and a bit? Is that right? Maybe longer, actually. Maybe about 2.5, 3 years away from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake. So this is circa 1999, and there's a big announcement that Channel 4, the fourth terrestrial channel in the UK, was going to be showing Texas Chainsaw Massacre as part of I want to say it was like a series they were doing in October, where they were playing horror movies every Saturday night or something. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre was getting played for the first time in its entirety, uncut on British TV. Now, this is about a year, I think, before the nasties were repealed. The law behind the video nasties were repealed, and all of a sudden we had ready access to a ton of Vipco Vault of Horror prints of everything from Island of Death right through to I Spit in Your Grave. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre was playing on Channel 4, and it was a late showing. I remember it being like after my work, so I would have finished at 10. I would have walked home because I was fit, young, and I could afford a 45-minute walk. And I was of age, so I like to rip the arse of it with alcohol. And in Scots terms, translated into English, I like to partake in more than my fair share of sensible amounts of drinking. And I got myself, it was a half bottle of Jack Daniels, and I had the house to myself. I was still living at home at the time, and my mum was staying away or whatever, so it was just me at home. My younger brother was away, older brother was out with friends, me, my half bottle of Jack Daniels, Texas Chainsaw Massacre on the TV, and this movie made me pretty much drink that bottle in about half an hour, because I was a kind of quivering mess. I had never seen anything like this in my entire life. And yes, there's a combination of alcohol, heightening the awareness, me also being in the house myself. But every movie I had seen up until this point, maybe notwithstanding something like a Hellraiser, which felt very adult, even as a kind of mid-teenager, like 14, 15, 16, Hellraiser felt to me like that's what adults watch, that's not what kids watch. It's not like a Jason movie or something. Texas Chainsaw Massacre instantly, almost from about 5 minutes into it, just like draped me in this kind of cloak of unease. And it was something about the kind of lo-fi way it was shot, something about the scenery, like the long periods of space and sound, and particularly just how weird the characters were. Like, this kind of felt almost like a parody of how people act and behave and how teenagers are, and obviously it's set in the 70s, so there's a bit of that as well. But the moment that changed me, I mean, like fully changed me, got me into, right, like we need to start watching a shitload of dark horror movies, is the scene I think that affected everyone when they watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time. And it's the first proper kill in the movie, where Leatherface appears, smacks, like the door opens, smacks the guy on the head, grabs him, pulls him in, slams shut the big metal door, and you're kind of left like just in like a stunned, shocked silence. And then the movie from that point becomes like the worst fever dream ever. It is a movie that just goes out its way to continually up the weirdness, up the creep level, and just the trauma. Like this movie is trauma. And I always get concerned about how it's going to hold up, because there is that feeling that certain movies hit you at a certain time and they actually don't stand up to scrutiny with new audiences later on. And one of the biggest tests would be what Baz would make of that movie. Now, Baz will go on record and tell you that this is maybe one of his favourite horror movies ever made, which to me is a testament to how fucking good this movie is. That someone 40 odd years later who grew up not interested in horror and was given movies which on the scarometer are classed as a lot scarier than this, a lot more effective, bigger budgets, you know, jump scares and all the rest, would sit down and this movie would resonate with him, I think is a testament to how well it's made. Texas Chain Saw Massacre is a short, sharp, horrible, like, house of pain that you sit through as an audience member. And you hear the stories about, I mean, it looks miserable. You can almost, it's like smell-o-vision. You can almost smell the screen. And I think a lot of that is due to the horrible filming conditions they went through, the extreme heat, the fact that the cast and crew themselves just felt horrible making it, felt ill making it. And that transcends somehow through the kind of frantic camera work, as a real kind of jarring, syncopated, kind of kinetic flow that never just gradually sweeps through, but always kind of feels like it's jumping and kind of jarring around. The cast here, there's no incredible performances in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Suffice to say, our final girl, who by the end of it you genuinely think was almost murdered on set. But everyone is kind of like an extreme caricature almost of what the kind of typical hick character would be, or the typical anti-war character would be. Famously, everyone, and I've yet to find anyone that actually likes the character of Franklin. You know, like no one feels like he fully grounded three-dimensional character in this one, which kind of adds to his fever dream-like quality. Everyone is like a steroid-injected version of what they would be. I also love the fact that in later day, and this happens with every franchise, so I can't throw Texas Chain Saw Massacre under the bus on this one, there isn't any like need to explain Leatherface at all in any way, shape or form. He's just a character that wears human flesh. We get the feeling that he's maybe disfigured, and that could be a kind of facial disfiguration from birth. Could be an accident that happened. I was going to say a happy accident, but that's when you go too early, if you know what I mean, guys. Every guy knows what I mean. But you know, like there's that could have been an accident at the kind of local abattoir. You don't know. And all the characters in here that retell stories are all unreliable witnesses. Like right from the start, when we pick up our hitchhiker, it's like, it's a good picture, it's $5, it's a good picture. You know, like straight away when you see him, like you're instantly of the opinion, like one, I would never let anyone in my car that looked and acted like that. I mean, what the fuck are they thinking? But two, like even the way he behaves is kind of seen, the way they react to him almost grims the level of weird of other characters. Like if they're prepared to let this guy in, of course this must just be the world that we lived in, and this must be what rural Texas must feel like. And as a result, you're kind of always on the back foot when you meet characters after that. You know, are they evil because of the way they act, or am I prejudiced because the way that I am looking on someone like that? Am I looking down my nose at this character unfairly? Turns out I wasn't. Even back then, this movie I kind of had everyone pegged pretty much. I remember sitting in awe of this movie all the way through it, up to the dinner table scene at the end, and just when I thought the movie couldn't get any weirder or more traumatic than it was. The fact that they are holding a kind of desiccated grandfather his hand with a hammer, getting him as if he's going to like deliver the killing blow to kill her nice and quick because Grandpa never missed. All this stuff while she is screaming, and the like Hooper's choice of kind of close eye zooms, it is just so visceral and so angry and so aggressive and so in your face. If you were to believe the rumours, Tobe Hooper deliberately kept the blood to a minimum, and he did that because he thought he was going to be able to pass this as like a family movie certification wise, which like blows my mind. And I thought for the longest time that was rubbish. But explain why the movie doesn't have that. And then I look at things like the remake and the movies that have come afterwards, and I know I might get some hate for this, but I don't care. They're inferior products because they focus on delivering the practical effects that Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't need. What it had was cerebral and psychological and visceral in your brain. It didn't need to necessarily show it on the screen. When our female character is hooked up on the meat hook, we don't see a pool of blood underneath her, we don't get anything, but we feel that pain like intrinsically within our skin. It's almost like there are certain things that happen in movies where you can feel the pain of it. Like anytime a character's nail comes off, like I've never had a nail come off my hand, but like there's something inside that winces and recoils as if I know what that pain is. Eye trauma, it's the same sort of idea. There's something primal about that's not supposed to do that, and that would hurt. That's why it's attached to our body. And the hook, I can't ever imagine what that would feel like. But when it happens, every time I take a deep breath, and I can't help it, it's involuntary. It's my body just like does it straight away. And this movie's full of that, like just bits where like it gets inside of you. It weirdly gets under your skin for a movie about a skin-wearing psychopath. It's no surprise that Leatherface is loosely based on Ed Gein. Interestingly enough, there's another movie from around the same time called Deranged, and both these movies came out loosely based on Ed Gein. Deranged is actually more in line with who Ed Gein was as a person. It's not as good as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is still very much worth checking out because it's that kind of causal effect of the floodgates being open and all bets being off in horror cinema that we can afford to do a movie that's adapted that way. And I've not seen it in a few years, even though I own it. I want to say that actually in Deranged the character is Ed Gein. I might be wrong about that, but it might be time to watch that again soon. But it's another movie that just feels inherently off. In the UK, cinema was very much inherently off at this time period as well. By this point, we are 1 year removed from The Wicker Man, which is a movie that's woozy anyway, but we're already getting like the Quatermass stuff, the Stone tapes, like all this like weird 70s shit, which is all esoteric and off to the side. And there's something in the water, just like the 70s is it like the answer to the counterculture? Maybe. Like maybe this is this is society rebelling against the rebellious nature of sex, drugs and free love. Maybe, I don't know. But the 70s is dangerous. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is maybe the best example of that. Whilst there are plenty of other movies in the 70s that push things far beyond what Texas Chainsaw Massacre does, actually, in the fact that it doesn't go as far, makes it weirdly more effective. There are papers and books and video analysis and reams of breakdowns as to why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre works, and I don't know if I agree fully with any of them. You add in a soundtrack which is full of kind of weird, almost bulb flash recharge noises, of strange, bizarre, kind of almost homemade stringed instrument, like weird movements, and just an unsettling. This movie has an ability. I'm stumbling all over my words here, but there's about a million things to say. This movie has an inherently clever ability of just removing everything, like no score, and never following a character. Whereas movies before and after would feel the need to score a character moving, because that's, let's bring the score in here and we need to make movement. This movie doesn't need to do that. It just is inherently confident in its own ability to deliver. I don't know if Tobe Hooper knew the impact the Texas Chainsaw Massacre would have when he made it. And he's a director who's infinitely fascinating. He's a bona fide master of horror, but if you actually look at his filmography, very few of his movies you would actually class as being like incredible movies. Yeah, he has a great run in the 70s, I think a pretty solid run in the 80s, and the 90s onwards is where he kind of loses his shit a little bit. But there's plenty out there, and he was a guy who genuinely went for the fences with his movies. If you watch Life Force, you'll see what I mean. Life Force is a movie which, I would just love to have been in the pitch meeting. There's all those stories that go around about the mountains of drugs that Tobe Hooper was doing when he was making movies, and you would think there was an exaggeration until you watch Life Force and you're like, oh, this guy's high. It's just all there, but he still managed to churn out incredible movies with great performances, wild cinematography as well, and worked on a high budget. He could handle budget. Salem's Lot is a great example of what you could do with a long form. If you watch it all in one sitting, it does get a bit boring in parts, but the terror in Salem's Lot is almost unmatched. It's just like those scary scenes when you take them out. Like Barlow as a character is absolutely terrifying, and that's Tobe Hooper. Right, granted, it's working a little bit off with the Stephen King story and all the rest, but it's Tobe Hooper that's put it together, and it's terrifying. I could not imagine watching that on TV as a kid, and I now know why it holds a special place amongst, adults now who grew up watching it. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of those scenarios where a director makes a movie that is so good, so good on his first try, and he can never quite capture it. You never quite get back to that level that it was before. And to be honest with you, if Tobe Hooper had never made another movie again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre would still remain, this incredible work of cinema. It is at times effortless, and at other times you feel every single second of filming on that set, and the weird combination of Brundlefly merging of that on screen is a sight to behold. When it finished, well, linking back to when I was 18, and when it finished on the TV, I was all very, 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 very drunk. I had filmed it, I'd recorded it on the VHS, which was an old recording format for the very young children out there. I had it on VHS, and I woke up hungover the following day and was like, that movie wasn't that scary. That was the alcohol. That movie is never that scary. And I watched it the following day, granted, hungover. But I got to the end and I was just still in awe. So it was twice within 24 hours, and it blew me away just as much the second time. And it's continued to do so every time I've watched it since. I've owned this movie on God knows how many formats, the most recent one being the Second Sight 4K UHD print of it, which is, I can't imagine them ever getting the movie to look better than it does there. But it's incredible. I watched it about a week and a half ago, and I was kind of struck by all the detail that is in this movie that was hidden behind the grain when I watched it the first time and has slowly been cleared up. There's so much detail in the house, and even Leatherface as a character. Having watched that movie, sometimes horror fans are weird. I would never have thought after watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre the first time, we can build a franchise around this character. But weirdly it works. It is a wholly inconsistent franchise. In fact, most of them I dislike. But I will always check out a movie with Leatherface because he's such a weird, bizarre character. He's not a Michael Myers, or he's not a Freddy, or a Jason, or a Pinhead. There's something sad about the character because he doesn't know he's doing wrong, and I that element kind of floors me a little bit. Whereas other ones clearly know they're doing things wrong. They clearly know, but he doesn't. And when you watch Leatherface, Texas Chain Saw Massacre 3, they really try and explore that. It doesn't fully work for me, but they try and explore it more. The problem with the franchise as a whole is they try and up the surrounding characters, make them quirkier, weirder. They keep adding more surrounding characters, and they kind of lose sight of what made the original so impactful. And that is the weirdness, the creepiness, the stillness, followed by the screams. And that's all you need in a good horror movie. Sometimes you don't need to see what happens behind the door when the door closes. The sounds of screaming are enough to terrify you more than the actual viewing of the acts on the screen themselves. Texas Chain Saw Massacre is an absolute classic. It sometimes jockeys for second position on my list, but in this particular couple of months that I've been kind of thinking about this a little bit more, it's landed third. Number 2 will be coming tomorrow, and you can see if you agree or disagree with this placement, but having just watched that on 4K UHD, it's really fucking good. So that's where we are with that. And that's your review of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Absolutely incredible work of horror cinema. On any given day, if anyone came to me and said it was the best horror movie ever made, I wouldn't argue with them. I think it's that fucking good. If you have been checking out this series on YouTube, thank you very much. The support I've been getting over there has been absolutely incredible, and I'm going to be aiming to do more content on YouTube after this series concludes. So thank you very much for doing that. It really means a lot checking them out there, interacting in the comments. The most important thing you can do is subscribe though. That way you get all the episodes after this, and you can check out the stuff that I did before on this very sparsely filled channel. That's because this podcast will be 10 years old as of Thursday, the 31st of August 2023. This week, this Thursday, we turn the big 1-0. And as a podcast, we've only found our video feed recently, so there's over 1,200 episodes on podcatchers out there, so please go and check them out if you like the content you're getting here and you're sick of looking at my face. If you're checking us out on the Spotify, then please answer the question that is on all these episodes. Over there you can check us out in video or audio format. And if you're listening to us on any of the podcatching apps out there that exist for you on a myriad of different devices, please hit subscribe there as well. Access to our plethora of back catalogue episodes and everything that we do moving forward are there for you as well. Only 2 left in the series. My number 2 pick is coming its way to you tomorrow, so what's left for me to say is wherever you are, wherever the time zone is, and whatever you're up to in this big bad world of ours, please take care of yourselves out there. This is Duncan McLeish broadcasting live from under the stairs, and I am signing off.